the mandatory delay to make sure that this actually picks up my greeting. Hi, folks. John Adamson with the Rehab and Documentation Guru. So I received an email from a guy by the name of Joe. He and his department watched my Documentation Essentials webinar through Allied Health Education, which is the only entity that I'm actively speaking through right now. I do have some pre-records with um, another company, Summit Professional Education, but this Allied Health is the one I'm continuing to go with. I do recommend them. They have high quality courses. So his question to me was he's planning on implementing, based on the course, a continual quality improvement related to documentation and wanted to know if I had any forms. And the answer is no. And the reason for that is one, I haven't gotten around to it, but two, I have found that documentation review forms really do need to be EMR specific to really make sense. Because, for one thing, when you're doing a review, you don't want to be, you want things to flow naturally in your review based on your EMR. How does your EMR open? How do you get to the patient? What's the first thing you notice about the chart? That way, it's easy to flow from a reviewer standpoint and from the therapist standpoint, because the therapist that's going to be looking at your review will probably be looking simultaneously at their documentation. And if it's pretty easy for them to discern flow of your review based on what's in the EMR, it's more likely to stick. So, how would you go about maybe creating your own for like a CQI program? Well, pretty straightforward. So, taking, let's say, like the base course of Documentation Essentials, what do I focus on in that? I focus on the definition of medical necessity, specifically the words reasonable and necessary. And what do those words mean? So, remember, the base root of the word reasonable has to do with dollar value. So, is it pretty clear that money was well spent, for one thing? And secondly, from a necessity standpoint, is it clear that everything the therapist did necessitated their licensure, or could a non-licensed person have done what they did? And then just systematically go through everything. So starting off, say, with diagnoses. Do the diagnoses tell a tale of, here's another word, complexity, sufficient complexity? And if there's diagnoses there, are they supported by the documentation? So I'd be looking for correlations between findings in the eval and the actual diagnoses being used by the therapist. Next, I'd want to look at things that are like major analysis statements. So the reason for referral right off the bat at the eval, maybe my 10-day progress notes, and definitely my discharge. Did the therapist do a good job of telling the parable? Did they do a good job of bridging the gap between reasonable and necessary, just like I teach in that course? I would look at their skilled intervention statements. Is it really clear that they are following a methodology that, one, gives homage to the definition of that intervention that they are billing? And two, is it pretty clear, if I'm a reviewer looking at that it's sophisticated? There is a level of comprehensive knowledge that this person has in their brain delivering this care that makes this a medically necessary therapy, PTOT speech intervention. And then also related to skill, am I seeing a lack of copy paste? Am I seeing alterations in care over time that are tied into the ongoing analysis of where the patient is? How are they achieving their goals? If goals are not being met, what are they doing to alter those things? I'm looking at goals. Are they SMART at a minimum? And if they are SMART, of course, they're going to fix the rest of what I'm going to say. Do they have measurable functional deficits and underlying impairments that we are addressing? And do those things get measured on an ongoing basis to make sure that we're tracking the efficacy of our treatment to achieve those goals? Another thing I'm going to look at is whether or not the therapist is considering all elements of the MICE model of care. And if you're not familiar with that, I cover that pretty extensively in my course, but I have done videos in the past on this channel related to MICE, the MICE model of care. So Anyway, some things to consider. Obviously, regulatory requirements you're going to be looking for is the therapist supervising the therapist assistant at the intervals that your particular state does require, and or if it's not as restrictive as something like Medicare, are you at least doing that? Are you following orders like frequency? Are you making sure that all your CPT codes are aligned with actually quantifiable, measurable impairments? Because if they're not, they don't belong in the care plan. And is it clear that you're doing everything you can to safely and effectively discharge the patient? And so, using some of those things as general guidelines, I would formulate a form and then try to streamline it as time goes on, because quality assurance or quality improvement is an ongoing process, obviously, like CQI would indicate. And you're going to be the best person to know what your staff and what your EMR requires, because I've seen a lot of EMR and they're all set up differently, and it would make more sense to just custom craft what you've got. And who knows, you might end up developing a tool that is excellent for that particular EMR. And then guess what? You have a marketable tool that you could try to sell and even offer consultation related to how you've used that particular form to your own advantage, as long as there's nothing that could correlate with a HIPAA violation, of course. But the form itself, wouldn't do that. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. Thanks so much for watching. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care. God bless.